Yes, I graduated in 2010 from the Animal Care and Husbandry lab. Obviously, my life is not taking me in that direction, but I just wanted to, he's going to do this most of the time, so he'll be very entertaining. And, I just wanted to, my biggest thing when I found out that Parker was going to have Down syndrome was, how can I make a difference to everybody else? You know, I've always worked with people with special needs, disabilities, anybody who is different. So when I was 12, I started working, I lived in California, and which is like 10 years in advance for working with people with disabilities, by the way. Some of the things that I did in California with these people, we are now just doing here in Ohio, which may not seem like a really big deal, but the fact that we're just starting to open up to our typical peers about children and adults with special needs in Ohio, whereas they were doing that 10 years ago in California, is kind of upsetting to me. You know, I talked to a lot of people who, they didn't even know that their school had a special education program. They had no idea that there were children with special needs that went to school with them. None. They are uncomfortable around people with special needs, Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, anything like that. Anybody who looks different talks differently. And I understand. I don't actually judge anybody who is uncomfortable around people who are different than them, because who wouldn't be? If you didn't grow up around it, if you're not used to them, why would you be comfortable with that? So, I was 23 when I got pregnant with Parker, and he was a surprise, but I was so excited. It was amazing. And this is the first time I've ever actually told the story to a large group of people. When I was 19 weeks pregnant, I was offered the opportunity to do a blood test. And it's a genetic test. And they were going to test for any abnormalities. Trisomy 18, 13, 21. I'm not going to get into what trisomy 18 and 13 are right now, but trisomy 21 is just an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. Causes Down syndrome is the biggest thing. So I actually only took the blood test because I wanted to know the sex of the baby. And I was just super impatient for the 20-week ultrasound. Throughout my entire life, I've been a very impatient person. So it didn't shock anybody that I decided to do this. And I was at work when I got the news that, so people in the medical field, I was at work on a Friday at 4 p.m. and I was waiting on a customer, so I could not answer my phone. So I got a voicemail. So I listened to the voicemail, and it's my doctor, my OB, and she says over my voicemail that my child is going to have Down syndrome. And, oh yeah, it's a boy. So, 23 years old, having no idea what that means. And it's not even, she doesn't even say Down syndrome. She says trisomy 21, which at the time I had no idea what trisomy 21 meant, right? I knew 13 and 18 because I had friends who had experienced that. Long story short, they're not the good ones, right? They cause a lot of issues. So here I was thinking that I was going to go through some horrific medical experience and that my first pregnancy was over. So I called Jeff, my fiance. I tell him, obviously I'm hysterical. And by the way, I worked at a tractor supply company, okay? So like crying in front of a group of men who have no idea how to support you is pretty much the most embarrassing thing that can happen. So I was already devastated, embarrassed that I had to go into a shop full of greasy men crying hysterically with a swollen face, telling them, hey, I have to go home. I just found out my baby's gonna have trisomy 21, okay? So I leave, call him, you know, he has no idea what I'm talking about. He probably can't even understand me. I call my mom, she's a nurse. So I tell her, the best news I've ever gotten is, it's okay. It's gonna be fine. You know, he will be just as loved as any other baby. So I pull over, still crying hysterically. And she comes to get me, because of course Jeff's like 2 hours away on a job site somewhere, of course. And we start the research. because that's what I did. That is who I am. To fix problems, I read. I go on the internet because Google knows everything. I Pinterest things because I Pinterest things. And I just knew that from here on out, my life was going to change. And it was not going in a direction that I ever thought was possible, right? So sitting in your guys' seats, because I was at one point, probably in the back corner up there sleeping, to be honest with you. I never experienced, I'd always looked at people with disabilities, I was like, oh, those parents are saints. I could never do that. Can you imagine having a child with a special need? Can you imagine having a baby with Down syndrome? I could never imagine it. It would be devastating. And now looking back at it, I go, all right, I get it. Like, it's scary knowing you're going to have a child who's different from everybody else around them for the rest of their lives. But part of the reason I wanted to come talk to you guys today was to tell you how my life's not that different, how I still obviously chase a 2-year-old around, regardless of if he's walking or not. So that's a little bit about Parker. He's 2, just turned 2 on the 17th. He's stubborn. All right, that kid won't listen to me for anything. He's not talking yet. He makes, rambling noises, stuff like that, but it's more just repetitive noises that mama, he doesn't have a clear connection of what that all means, okay? Gross motor, which is walking, the big movements that you do. He's not walking yet. He's crawling, which we just had happen like a couple months ago. So that was a really big deal in our house. And he's fine motor skills, which is like picking things up. Things that you would never even assume that people need to be taught. Because you just, little kids just learn it, right? Everything needs to be taught to Parker. We've had to teach him to bend his legs. We have to teach him to use a spoon, which is going awful, by the way, it's very messy. We have to teach him, just from moving to one section of the house to another, as in like you have 2 couches that are sitting next to you. You stand in the middle, going like this. We've been working on that for months. So yeah, life is a little bit more difficult for us. And I wouldn't say difficult in a bad way. I would just say it's different. So you have, he does have a sister. She's 8 months old. They're complete opposites, and not just like typical from atypical standards, which is, by the way, the correct terminology when you're talking about a child with disabilities. If you're talking to parents, the best thing to do is say atypical or typical. Don't use the word normal, because my child is normal. He's just different than the rest of his peers. So typical and atypical. His sister is, again, 8 months old. Her name is Sarah. And, here, I forgot I had a visual aid.
You do have a visual.
Look at that. So I haven't gotten Parker to smile for me for a picture since he was like 9 months old. So that's the look I usually get him to stay. And that is my daughter. She looks like she's taking a selfie. And yes, she is that diva-ish. And they are basically on the same level. Okay, so when we talk about kids with disabilities or special needs, especially in the Down syndrome world, and I will call it a totally different world, and I'm not going to get into culture and all that crazy stuff because I do enough of that through my homework. So it's called regression. So he's 8 months regressed, I guess is what you would say. I never use that. I just say he hits the milestones of a 8 to 10 month old. And she is like where he's at, except for almost further. Sarah's already taken her first steps. Okay, so that was a little more difficult, right? So when talking to his Down syndrome doctor, she asked if he was walking yet. And we do go to a neurodevelopment center where they specialize in Down syndrome. It's very interesting because even though they specialize in Down syndrome, the medical field especially is still very behind in how they approach things with children with special needs. It's all about going off of normal milestone charts. So it's actually, I'm a part of a group called Gigi's Playhouse, in which we actually strive to teach medical professionals how to talk to parents whose children have special needs. We like to discuss don't talk about what your kid can't do, right? Don't come in or don't sit down in front of me and say, oh, Parker can't walk, he can't talk, he can't feed himself, he can't bathe himself, he's not brushing his own teeth yet. I know. Thanks. Live with him. I can tell you that I do all of that for him on a regular basis. But come in and tell me where he's at and why it's a good thing and what I need to do to make the next steps. So that's the biggest goal of Gigi's Playhouse. They also provide ASL classes. So, did you hit your hand? I know. Did you hit your hand? They also provide sign language classes for parents and for children. That's how a lot of kids with Down syndrome start to speak, is they use gestures to go along with words. The biggest problem is their expressive language. Hold on. So they might understand what you're saying, but they don't have you just dropped it. It's right there. They don't have the ability to talk back to you. They might know that they want to go to the bathroom. They might know that they're hungry. But unfortunately, somewhere in their neurons in their brain, it's not connecting enough, right? To tell me, hey, Mom, I'm really hungry because you've been watching Charmed for 4 hours and I want a snack. That doesn't happen often, by the way. And then that's my kids again. We just got family pictures taken. He didn't smile once. I have a lot of pictures of him yawning though. Okay, so the next thing I guess I'll discuss is the scariest part is, what are your chances of having a baby with Down syndrome? I get asked this by every person.
You're good.
Hi. I get asked this by every person in my age group, or younger, or older, who is planning on having children. The statistics are all over the place, okay? Anybody can have a baby with Down syndrome. You don't have to be older, obviously. At one point, they thought that only people over the age of 35 were capable of having children with Down syndrome. And now they understand that over 80% of people under the age of 35 have children with Down syndrome. This says an occurrence of 1 in 792 births. I've heard 1 in 650, I've heard 1 in 800, I've heard 1 in 1,000. So again, statistics are everywhere. But I guess the only point I'm trying to make is you don't have to be special to have a baby with Down syndrome. So again, I was 23. One of the reasons I did not believe that it was even possible was because I'd always heard that if you were over the age of 35, just don't have kids. Just don't have kids if you're over the age of 35, because you will have a baby with Down syndrome. That's it. If you don't have kids before 35, you shouldn't even be trying, right? Well, now I can tell you that's false, because I know my aunt, she's in her 40s, she is pregnant, and she is not having a baby with Down syndrome. But I was 23. So yeah, I felt so slighted, right? I was like, this is not possible. Why? Like, I'm 23, I'm healthy, I don't drink, I don't smoke. Like, I was, during my pregnancy, I'm not gonna tell you, like, but I was like, I've heard of people going in and their babies are addicted to heroin, but guess what? Their babies are healthy after a couple of weeks in the NICU. I was in the NICU, well, Parker was in the NICU, I was not, for 2 weeks with pulmonary hypertension. He just had problems breathing, feeding problems, which is very typical for children with Down syndrome, oral motor skills. So he was fed through a tube for about 14 days. And then finally I decided that Mama Bear was going to come out. Never experienced that before. I've always been, stubborn and like to argue with people, but I never felt the urge to yell at somebody as much as I did his doctors. I finally just told them, you have 2 options. We're either going to take him home on oxygen because you're just monitoring him by this point, or we're going to try him without oxygen and we're going home. I said, he's been in the hospital for 2 weeks. There's absolutely nothing wrong with him other than you guys monitoring him. I'm done. So, and that's okay. That's okay to stick up for your child because you are going to be the only one who will. That was, God, I had so many people tell me that and I didn't believe it. Every person with Down syndrome, or person's parents with Down syndrome that I connected with, and that was a million. They always said, you are your child's advocate. But I don't think that's true. I am not my only child's advocate. All of you will be my child's advocate. Teachers for IUP meetings, you guys will be the ones to sit down with parents and tell them what your kids are doing, not what your kids can't do. Nurses, doctors, nurse practitioners. I had a nurse come in. This is actually kind of funny. She came in after Parker was born and we were in the recovery room before he was sent to NICU. And she goes, "Now you know about the Down syndrome." I was like, if you whisper it, it's still there. It doesn't, yes, I'm aware of it. It's okay. I've had doctors tell me I'm sorry, which don't tell a patient that you're sorry that their child has Down syndrome. Because we're not sorry. We're okay with it. I mean, those of us who have had time to process it. You know, when I first went to my new OB after I obviously left the person who left the voicemail on my phone, he said, "This is fine. You're going to have a healthy, happy baby. He is just like any other baby. You don't have to be worried. We're not going to do any special tests." He's like, "Don't worry about it." He's like, "You're going to come in just like every other mom. You're going to have the heartbeat monitor. You're going to have your ultrasound." He's like, "We still want to do another anatomy ultrasound." He said, "And I want you to have pictures, and I want you to be excited." He said, "And I'm going to give you these books, because again, I like to read. And I want you to come back in a couple of weeks, and I want you to tell me how you're feeling." Because that's the most important part. He's like, "How are you feeling about this?" He said, "Because I'm going to be honest with you, when your son is born, he's not going to care that he has Down syndrome. It's not going to even hit him, even when he's 6, when he's 7. He's not going to care that he has Down syndrome because guess what? He has Down syndrome. He's not going to know any different. You can't wave a magic wand. You can't fix it. There are 3 types of Down syndrome. I'm going to be honest, I'm not an expert on mosaic, translocation, or trisomy 21. I do know a lot more about trisomy 21 than I do the other 2. The biggest ones that I know are these a lot less common. I do know parents who have children with mosaic and translocation. Though they actually found out when their children were a couple months old. Mostly because they don't have very many of the physical characteristics of children with trisomy 21. So genetic mutation. One thing I should probably mention is Down syndrome is not hereditary. So if my daughter has kids, it does not automatically mean that she's at a higher risk for having a child with Down syndrome. So, like I said, 80% of people or children with Down syndrome are born to mothers under 35 of age. Every mom that I've actually come in contact with in Northeast Ohio, including the playgroup I'm a part of, is under 35. I think I'm the youngest at 26. And, right? Yeah, 26. And then, forget all the time. And then the oldest, I think, is 32. And we're at all age ranges. We tried to stick from like 0 to 3. All different development levels because like autism, there are different levels of Down syndrome. Now, I'm not going to tell you there's a spectrum. I'm just going to tell you developmentally that you could have one child who is going to college, which does happen. They open businesses. The things that they can do are crazy. And then you can have a child who lives at home, hangs out with their parents, has this job just to keep them on the same routine. And everywhere in between. But isn't that the same for typical people as well? You have development of all stages. You have some people who are just like the most ambitious people I've ever met, and they are opening businesses and graduating with PhDs at 12 years old. I don't think that actually happens, but I do know that you guys, sky's the limit for typical people. But the sky's not the limit for atypical children and atypical people, but I think that's more on society. That's more on what the barriers that we put up for them, right? That's what we we automatically assume, oh, he has Down syndrome and he can't do that. And I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it. Even with my son, sometimes I'm like, oh, there's no way that he's going to be able to stand. Like, he can't stand by him. Don't even try. Why are you guys trying to have him stand by himself? He's still really weak. His muscle tone is still really bad. I'm not kidding. One day that kid just stood up. I was like, oh. And at that point, I was like, I'm putting up barriers for my own kid. Because of everything else I was taught. That he's never going to amount to anything. He can't do it because he has Down syndrome. Don't push him because, what if he has a temper tantrum? Which they do, by the way, at every age, no matter the development level. Okay, so one of the biggest things that I like to talk about with anybody who will listen, and I'm sure my friends are actually quite annoyed, is the R word. And again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you use the word retard in a condescending tone, because I'm sure that I have too before Parker. I'm just going to explain some of the things that I've heard parents say and why we're not okay with it. It is not because we're too sensitive and we can't take a joke. It is not because we have accepted our child. It is because when I think of my child, I don't think of him as retarded. When I do things and someone says, oh, that was so retarded, I'm like, oh, what developmental delay did that have? Right? Like, oh, is that, video game retarded? Okay, is it autism? Is it Down syndrome? Like, what are you thinking of when you think of the word retarded? Because I'm not thinking of any of these words. Right? I'm not thinking of how stupid you're being. Very loud. You're being loud. I'm not thinking that something's stupid, so I decided to go ahead and call it retarded. Because, in my opinion, Parker's not stupid. Right? My 2-year-old little boy isn't stupid. You talk to older adults with Down syndrome, and they'll tell you it is offensive. That regardless of what you're using it for. We've all, and we use words all the time that represent entire groups of people, but we're not supposed to get offended over it. We're not supposed to look at it as rude, condescending, honestly, ignorant, I guess is the best word for it. So I had that little chart there. I thought it was kind of clever. But I'm a huge proponent for just choose a different word. It's all right. You're not going to look stupid in front of your friends. In fact, I will tell you as you get older, the more times you use that word, the more ignorant you seem. Especially to adults. And by the way, you never know who you're offending. You never know whose brother or sister has Asperger's. You never know whose brother or sister has autism. If they themselves have autism or Asperger's, because guess what? That's a hidden developmental delay, even if you want to call that. You can't look at a person and go, oh, that person has autism. But you can look at a person with trisomy 21, non-mosaic location, and go, oh, that person has Down syndrome. So you don't know who you're offending when you use that word. When you're sitting at the lunch table and you're going ahead and saying, this lunch menu's retarded. Okay, well, that person's brother has Asperger's. That person's brother is actually mentally retarded. And they don't have a specific diagnosis. So you've just insulted two people that you don't even know because you can't use that word. I'm not saying any of you guys do that. I'm just giving you examples. That's it for my slideshow. But I guess the last thing I really wanted to mention. How are we on time? We good?
You're good. You've got like 7 minutes.
Perfect. The last thing I really wanted to mention was, so next year we have to go through Parker's IEP meeting. And I'm a little bit terrified because I've heard horror stories from parents, not necessarily because I don't believe in the school system. But there are resources throughout Medina County. There are resources in Summit County. The state is legally required to provide parents of children with disabilities certain things, like early intervention. We do a Help Me Grow program where we have physical therapists, developmental specialists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, you name it. They can come to the house. Oh, are you okay? Yeah, you hit your face.
No.
You hit your face. You okay? I
Beat me.
Isn't he adorable?
So we have people who can come to the house through early intervention to help him. It helps not having a million doctor's appointments because God knows I have a million doctor's appointments to go to every month for him. And then we also go to private speech, private OT, private physical therapy once a week. And all of them obviously work on different things with him. I'm just going to put you in here for a second. I know. I saw that you hurt yourself. I was there. I'm just going to sit here and feed him some crunchies. I feel like it'll just go easier that way. But some of the resources that you can also volunteer at are Camp Cheerful, which is off of Paradise Road, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right around the corner. You work with people, adults and children with special needs. So if you ever wanted to kind of experience what it's like to actually, I don't want to say care for, but interact with people your age or children with special needs, that's a great place to do it. There's another one, and I'm really sorry I don't remember the name of it. It's in Strongsville. It's also a summer camp. And then there's Windfall Preschool that's right up the street, well, kind of by Hinckley, off of 94, I believe. And they're really great. They do a peer ratio, so typical peers compared to special needs peers, which is awesome because monkey see, monkey do. Like, you will be so surprised. It's any kid really, right? You have a child who's not walking yet, you put them in preschool. They see all their peers running around acting like fools. That's what they want to do, right? They want to run around and play with toys and throw things at people and just be toddlers. And so that's part of Windfall's biggest thing, is making sure that they're interacting with their typical peers. Inclusion is so much bigger now than it used to be. You know, making sure that Parker can go to kindergarten with peers his own age, things like that. So I guess that's really all I had to say for this. But does anybody have any questions?
Is it possible to have 2 kids with Down syndrome?
Yes. They are not sure why, but I do have a higher rate of having another child with Down syndrome. They cannot tell me. They say it's not hereditary, but I have a higher risk of having a second child with Down syndrome than you guys do, and I do know people who have done it. They
With
have
the same father? What if you
Yeah.
have a different father? Would your risks?
I know 2 people who have different fathers, and they do have two children with Down syndrome. Yeah. So, I mean, they say it's not the mother or the father, but realistically, if you look at it from that sense, it's mostly the mother. In my opinion, I'm not a medical professional, but in that sense, if you look at it like that, to me, that would mean it's more of a maternal.
So next year, when you go to your first IEP meeting, do you think he's going to start preschool then, or will it be a plan more for speech therapy and all of that?
Well, thanks to our insurance system, to continue having him get speech therapy and occupational therapy and PT at 3 years old throughout the year, I have to send him to preschool. So, not that I wouldn't to begin with, it just kind of depends on where he is developmentally. So it is for his preschool class, and it is more of a plan for speech therapy, occupational and physical therapy to make sure his teachers are giving him the hours he needs per day. So it's not necessarily like a typical IEP where they're in high school. You actually have to sit down and go through the core curriculum and stuff.